Welcome to Inspirational True Stories. Let's get started with today's story. If you like today's story, don't forget to click the subscribe button so you don't miss any videos. Click the notification bell to update our new stories as soon as possible. Thank you for supporting and accompanying the channel. Under the bright neon lights announcing St. Mary's General Hospital, Angela Parker paused, her breath visible in the chill of the early morning air. As the doors slid open, a gust of sterile, antiseptic air enveloped her, mingling with the scent of freshly brewed coffee from the nearby cafeteria. It was her first day as a nurse in a place renowned not just for its medical excellence but for the invisible barriers she knew she would face. Angela was not unfamiliar with the challenges ahead. She had grown up listening to her grandmother's stories of perseverance and grit, tales that sculpted her resolve as solidly as any education she received. Yet, knowing did not ease the flutter in her stomach, the jittery dance of her nerves, as she walked down the long, polished corridors lined with motivational posters, proclaiming unity and respect. Her uniform, pristine and sharply pressed, felt like armor as she clipped her badge, a small rectangle bearing her name and a photo that didn't quite capture her spirit, to her chest. Angela's eyes, bright and observant, scanned the environment, capturing details, a child's faint giggle echoing down the hall, the tired slump of an overnight shift worker, the hurried steps of doctors and nurses as a new day commenced. At the nurse's station, she introduced herself. Her voice, clear and steady, belied the twisting of her insides. The reception was mixed. Some greeted her with a smile, eyes crinkling in welcome, while others offered nothing more than a cursory nod before turning away. The air buzzed with whispered judgment, slipping into her consciousness like winter's cold seeping through thin clothing. "Can she handle the pace here?" Someone muttered not far enough away, their doubt a palpable entity that Angela felt compelled to meet head-on. Determined to prove her worth, she approached her first task with a meticulous attention to detail that was both a defense mechanism and a trait honed by years of proving herself in less than welcoming environments. Each bed she made, each chart she updated, and each patient she greeted was done with a precision that left no room for criticism. Her first interaction with Dr. William Greaves was a jolt back to reality. His reputation for brilliance was marred by a harshness that he made no effort to hide. When Angela extended her hand in greeting, he looked at it as if it were an offering he found distasteful. "Ms. Parker," he said, his voice smooth but cold, "I hope you are as competent as they say. We tolerate only the best here." His words, a thinly veiled challenge, hung between them, sharp and unwelcome. Angela's response was a smile, practiced and serene. "I have no intention of being merely tolerated, Dr. Greaves. I aim to excel." Her reply was met with a tight nod as Dr. Greaves turned on his heel, the matter apparently settled for the moment. As Angela moved through her rounds, each room she entered was a world unto itself, a tableau of human frailty and the fight for health and recovery. She navigated these worlds with a grace that belied the undercurrent of resistance she felt from certain corners of the hospital staff. Each whispered word, each sidelong glance, each moment of doubt from her colleagues accumulated, a weight she carried even as she smiled at her patients. Yet, with every patient's smile, every word of thanks, Angela felt a growing affirmation. She was exactly where she needed to be. In this place of healing, she would not only tend to physical wounds but also challenge the prejudices that threatened to undermine the very essence of care the hospital stood for. By the end of her first day, as Angela shed her scrubs for her street clothes, she felt the day's weight lift slightly. She had survived, had done more than that, she had proven her place here. Tomorrow she would do it all over again, armed with resilience and the quiet hope that change, though slow, was indeed possible at St. Mary's General Hospital. As the morning light shifted to the bright glare of noon, Angela's initial nervous energy morphed into a focused determination. With every room she entered and every patient she met, her resolve deepened. Yet the weight of expectation and the subtle currents of discrimination didn't ebb, they flowed around her, sometimes brushing against her, sometimes hitting head-on. In the cafeteria, where the clatter of trays and the murmur of voices formed a backdrop to her brief lunch, Angela sat alone. The small, round table accentuated the distance between her and her colleagues. As she unpacked a sandwich neatly wrapped, each layer a testament to her meticulous nature, she noticed the conversations around her taper off. The silence was a curtain drawn, segregating whispers from open dialogue. She could feel the eyes flickering in her direction, the unspoken questions about her competence and fit within the tight-knit community of St. Mary's staff. Resuming her duties, Angela decided to focus solely on her work, letting her competence speak for itself. The hospital prided itself on a hierarchy steeped in experience and expertise, and she knew that respect here was earned in the trenches of emergency responses and the quiet diligence of routine care. Her next task was to check on Mr. Samuel Johnson, an elderly patient known for his cantankerous nature. When she entered his room, the smell of antiseptic was strong, battling the underlying scent of illness. Mr. Johnson looked up with a scowl as she approached. "I don't want any nurses messing around today. Just leave the medication and go," he barked, his voice gruff with irritation. Angela responded with a calm she didn't quite feel. "I'm here to help you, Mr. Johnson. I'll check your vitals and make sure you're comfortable." Her hands were steady as she prepared the blood pressure cuff, her movements efficient and unobtrusive. Mr. Johnson watched her, his initial hostility waning slightly under her composed and professional demeanor. "You're new here, aren't you?" he asked, his tone still sharp but curious. "Yes, today's my first day," Angela replied, allowing a small, genuine smile to form on her lips. "They keep changing you nurses around. Never enough time to get to know anyone," he grumbled, though the edge in his voice had softened. As she continued her rounds, the pattern of subtle exclusion persisted. In one corridor, a group of nurses chatted amiably until they saw her approaching, their conversation ceasing abruptly, their bodies turning subtly to exclude her from their circle. Angela felt a pang of loneliness, but pushed it aside, reminding herself of the many patients awaiting her care, who valued her presence. Her next significant challenge came when she was called to assist in an emergency situation. A patient, Mrs. Green, had fallen in her room, and her cries had summoned a swift response from the staff. Angela was the first to reach her, and as she knelt beside the elderly woman, she could feel the assessing glances of her colleagues who had followed her into the room. "Let's get her back into bed safely," Angela directed, her voice calm and authoritative. She coordinated with the others, her directions clear and professional, ensuring that Mrs. Green was lifted without further injury. The teamwork required in that moment brought a temporary truce between Angela and her colleagues, their common goal overriding personal biases. After the emergency, Dr. Greaves approached her. His expression was unreadable as he watched her finishing her notes on the incident. "You handled that well," he conceded, his tone grudging. "But don't expect praise for doing your job. Consistency is what we value here." "Thank you, Dr. Greaves," Angela responded, her voice neither servile nor confrontational. "I intend to be consistent." As her first day drew to a close, Angela felt a mixture of exhaustion and accomplishment. She had navigated the complicated social landscape of St. Mary's, had faced overt and covert challenges to her place there, and had emerged with her professionalism intact. Her final task of the day was to report to the nursing supervisor, a formality that felt more like a test. Sitting across from the nursing supervisor, Ms. Hartley, Angela recounted the day's events, her report detailed and precise. Ms. Hartley listened, nodding occasionally, her face giving away little. "Very well, Ms. Parker. It seems you've managed quite a day. Continue this, and perhaps the staff will warm up to you. It takes time, Ms." Hartley said, offering the first overt acknowledgement of the cold reception Angela had faced. Walking back to her locker, Angela felt the weight of the day's trials lift slightly. She had made it through her first day, and tomorrow she would return, ready to face whatever came with the same resolve and dignity. Her footsteps echoed in the empty hallway, a solitary sound that, to Angela, sounded like perseverance. The morning after her first day, Angela arrived at St. Mary's with a renewed sense of purpose. Her encounter with Dr. Greaves the previous day had left her determined to not just perform well, but to excel beyond even the high expectations set by the hospital's demanding standards. As the sun crept higher, casting long shadows through the glass doors of the entrance, Angela felt the familiar flutter of settle into a steely resolve. As she prepared for her rounds, Angela reviewed patient charts with meticulous care, ensuring that no detail was overlooked. She was keenly aware that her every move might be scrutinized more harshly than her peers. Today, she would meet Dr. Greaves again, and she knew their interaction would be critical in setting the tone for her future at St. Mary's. Mid-morning brought her face-to-face with Dr. Greaves under less than ideal circumstances. She was administering medication to Mrs. Benton, a post-operative patient who was known for her spirited banter despite her fragile health. As Angela adjusted the IV drip, Dr. Greaves entered the room abruptly, his presence immediately commanding and austere. "Miss Parker, I trust you are finding your footing here without causing too much disruption." Dr. Greaves' voice was cool, his eyes scanning the medication chart over her shoulder. "Good morning, Dr. Greaves," Angela greeted him, maintaining her composure. "I am indeed settling in. Thank you for asking." Her tone was respectful yet confident, projecting a calm authority that she hoped would earn her some grudging respect from the senior doctor. Dr. Greaves raised an eyebrow, seemingly surprised by her poised demeanor. "Very well. I would like to observe your technique. Proceed," he commanded, folding his arms as he watched her intently. Angela's hands did not shake, her voice did not falter. She explained each step as she worked, her knowledge evident in her concise explanation of the medication's purpose and expected effect. Dr. Greaves listened, his expression unreadable, as Angela continued her care for Mrs. Benton. When the task was completed, Dr. Greaves nodded slowly, his scrutiny making the air in the room feel thick. "Your technique is adequate," he finally said, "but I will be interested to see how you handle more challenging situations. Medicine is not just about following procedures, it's about thinking on your feet." "I agree, Dr. Greaves," Angela replied, meeting his gaze directly. "I'm prepared to face those challenges head-on." Their exchange was interrupted by a nurse rushing in, her face etched with urgency. "Dr. Greaves, we have a situation with Mr. Larkin in room 204. He's having difficulty breathing." Without a word, Dr. Greaves turned on his heel, his coat billowing behind him as he strode out of the room. Angela followed swiftly, her mind shifting gears to the emergency at hand. In room 204, Mr. Larkin was visibly struggling for air, his breath shallow and labored. Dr. Greaves took charge immediately, examining the patient while barking orders at the surrounding staff. Angela was right by his side, ready with the oxygen mask and assisting in adjusting the patient's position to ease his breathing. The crisis passed with Mr. Larkin's breathing stabilizing, thanks to the swift and coordinated efforts of the team. Dr. Greaves, who had been a whirlwind of clinical efficiency, finally stepped back, allowing himself a moment to assess the situation post-adrenaline rush. "Good response, Ms. Parker," he commented, almost reluctantly. His nod was slight, but Angela felt it as a significant acknowledgement of her competence and readiness. "Thank you, Dr. Greaves. I'm here to learn and contribute," Angela said, her voice steady despite the residual tension from the emergency. As the day progressed, Angela found herself reflecting on the encounter with Dr. Greaves. It was clear he was a formidable figure at St. Mary's, a gatekeeper of sorts to the respect and acceptance she sought from her peers. His approval was not easily won, but Angela felt that today had marked a small victory in her ongoing battle for acceptance. She was not just another nurse, she was a professional dedicated to her craft and her patients. Returning to her duties, Angela carried with her a quiet confidence, fortified by the day's challenges and successes. Her interaction with Dr. Greaves had revealed the complexities of her new environment, not just the medical challenges but the interpersonal dynamics that would shape her career at St. Mary's. As the hospital corridors buzzed with the constant flow of patients and staff, Angela moved among them, no longer just a newcomer, but a capable nurse proving her worth with every step she took. Her journey at St. Mary's was just beginning, and she was ready to meet its demands with resilience and professionalism. After her assertive performance in the emergency situation with Mr. Larkin, Angela hoped the respect she earned would ease some of the tensions she felt among her colleagues. However, as days turned into weeks at St. Mary's General Hospital, the initial barriers of subtle discrimination and isolation did not dissipate. Instead, they morphed into a persistent undercurrent that Angela navigated daily. Despite her proven competence, Angela found herself repeatedly assigned to the most challenging patients, those who were critically ill and required complex care, or those whose attitudes towards her ranged from openly hostile to dismissive. These assignments, she suspected, were not coincidences but tests of her resilience and capability, perhaps even hoping for her failure. One afternoon, as Angela updated patient charts at the nurse's station, she overheard a conversation between two of her colleagues that confirmed her suspicions. "I just don't get why Greaves lets her handle the Henderson case. It's like he's setting her up to fail," one nurse whispered, not quite low enough. "Yeah, Henderson is one of our most difficult patients. He never listens, and with his condition, there's a lot riding on getting his cooperation," the other replied, casting a furtive glance towards Angela. Angela's hands stilled on the keyboard for a moment. She took a deep breath, allowing herself a moment to collect her thoughts and emotions before she resumed her typing. The whispers stung, but they also steeled her resolve. She would not let the underhanded comments or the hard looks break her spirit. During her rounds, she made it a point to provide exemplary care to Mr. Henderson, who had a reputation for being particularly unruly and racist. Despite his initial brusqueness and several overtly racist remarks, Angela treated him with professionalism and compassion. Her approach slowly yielded changes in Mr. Henderson. His compliance with his treatment regimen improved, and his manner towards Angela softened, somewhat grudging respect peeking through his gruff exterior. This small victory was bittersweet. While Angela felt a professional satisfaction in managing her patient well, the environment in which these wins were achieved was exhausting. She often found herself staying late to ensure everything was perfect with her patient's care, knowing any mistake would be magnified and potentially used against her. One evening, exhausted after a long shift, Angela sat in the break room alone, sipping her coffee. The walls, covered with cheerful posters about teamwork and respect, felt ironic given her experiences. As she rested, Dr. Greaves entered the room unexpectedly. Angela tensed, preparing herself for another terse exchange. Dr. Greaves seemed to contemplate her for a moment before speaking. "Ms. Parker, your handling of Mr. Henderson has not gone unnoticed," he began, his tone neutral. Angela looked up, meeting his gaze. "Thank you, Dr. Greaves. I believe every patient deserves our best effort, regardless of their personal views." He hummed, leaning against the doorframe. "And what of your views, Ms. Parker? How are you finding St. Mary's?" Angela considered her words carefully. "It's a challenging environment, not just medically but socially. I find myself needing to prove my worth far more frequently than I anticipated." Dr. Greaves nodded, his expression inscrutable. "Yes, it is a challenge here, and not all rise to meet it. Keep doing your work as you have been. That's all you can do." As he left, Angela felt a mix of frustration and determination. His words, though not unkind, highlighted the ongoing struggle she would face. She realized that her battle at St. Mary's wasn't just about overcoming patient prejudices or the rigors of healthcare, but also about navigating a workplace that didn't fully accept her yet. The next day brought more of the same subtle glances, whispered words, and challenging assignments. But Angela faced each with renewed vigor, knowing that her actions might slowly change the minds around her. Each patient's smile, each small thank you from a family member, reinforced her commitment to her career and her place at St. Mary's. Despite the adversities, Angela's days ended with reflections on her grandmother's words about perseverance and dignity. These thoughts gave her the strength to return each day, to face the whispers and challenges with her head held high, and to continue providing the compassionate care that was the hallmark of her profession. Each step Angela took in the hospital corridors was a testament to her resilience, her determination to not just succeed but to thrive and perhaps, in time, to transform St. Mary's into the inclusive, respectful community it aspired to be. Several weeks into her tenure at St. Mary's General Hospital, Angela found herself assigned to a case that would prove to be a turning point in her journey. Mr. Thomas Edwards, a VIP patient who had sustained serious injuries from a skiing accident, was admitted late one evening. Angela was surprised to learn that she would be his primary nurse, a responsibility typically reserved for more tenured staff. The murmurs about her assignment echoed through the corridors, but this time, Angela felt a different kind of anticipation stirring within her. Mr. Edwards was a stern-looking man with a scrutinizing gaze that seemed to weigh and measure the worth of those around him. As Angela entered his room for the first time, she could feel his eyes assessing her before she even introduced herself. His reputation as a demanding and powerful figure preceded him, and she understood that managing his care would require all her skills intact. "Good evening, Mr. Edwards. I'm Angela Parker, and I'll be your nurse tonight," she said, her voice calm and her demeanor professional. Mr. Edwards looked at her, his expression unreadable. "I expect the best care," he stated flatly, his voice firm. "I hope you are as competent as they claim." Angela nodded, accepting the challenge in his words. "I assure you, Mr. Edwards, that you will receive the utmost care and attention during your recovery here." Over the next few days, Angela's interactions with Mr. Edwards were a mix of professional exchanges and cautious report building. She handled his care with meticulous precision, addressing his needs efficiently and monitoring his recovery closely. Mr. Edwards was a patient who demanded excellence and was quick to point out any deviation from his expectations. However, Angela's consistent professionalism slowly earned his respect. If you find it interesting, please comment number 2. If it is not interesting, please press number 1, so we can fix the content to be better and better. One afternoon, while adjusting his pillows to make him more comfortable, Angela and Mr. Edwards had their first real conversation beyond his immediate medical needs. "If you don't mind me asking, Mr. Edwards, how did you find yourself on the slopes at this time of the year?" Angela inquired, her tone light and conversational. Mr. Edwards' face softened slightly, a hint of a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "I suppose I still fancy myself a young man," he replied. "It's a hard thing, watching the years pass and trying to keep up with them." Angela smiled, understanding the sentiment more than he could know. It's the spirit that counts, Mr. Edwards. Age is just a number, after all. Their exchanges grew more frequent and less formal over the following days, and Angela learned more about Mr. Edwards not just as a patient but as a person. He spoke of his travels, his business ventures, and occasionally of his family. What he did not discuss was his position as the CEO of Healthcare United, one of the largest healthcare conglomerates in the country, a fact Angela was unaware of. Meanwhile, Angela continued to face challenges within the hospital. Her competence in handling Mr. Edwards' case did not go unnoticed, but neither did it completely quell the undercurrents of discrimination she faced. Whispers and sideways glances persisted, though Angela met them with her now characteristic blend of professionalism and grace. One day, Mr. Edwards caught one of these exchanges, a whispered comment about Angela's race, made by another staff member as they thought he was asleep. His sharp gaze followed the staff member as they left the room, his expression turning thoughtful. The next morning, Mr. Edwards requested a meeting with the hospital administration. Angela was asked to attend an unusual request that piqued her curiosity and apprehension. As she entered the conference room, she found Mr. Edwards already there, his presence commanding and resolute. "Ms. Parker, please have a seat," he said, gesturing to the chair next to him. Angela sat, her mind racing with possibilities of what this meeting could entail. Mr. Edwards addressed the room, his voice firm. "I have been observing not just my own care, but how this hospital operates. I've seen many things that impress me, and some that do not." His gaze then turned to Angela, and he continued, "Nurse Parker here has provided exemplary care under challenging circumstances. It has come to my attention that not all the challenges she faces are related to her duties." The room fell silent, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Angela felt a mixture of fear and relief, fear of exposure and conflict, but relief that someone with influence had seen her struggle and chosen to speak on her behalf. As Mr. Edwards outlined his observations and proposed changes, Angela realized that this moment could be the catalyst for real change at St. Mary's. Her role in caring for this influential patient had inadvertently positioned her at the center of a potential shift in the hospital's culture, one that might finally address the discrimination she had been enduring quietly but resolutely. Following the meeting with Mr. Edwards and the administration, Angela felt a renewed sense of optimism, tempered by a quiet apprehension. She knew the cultural change Mr. Edwards had suggested would not come easily. St. Mary's was steeped in tradition, and habits, especially those rooted in prejudice, would not vanish overnight. However, the support of such a high-profile patient as Mr. Edwards gave Angela hope that she might finally see a shift. But that hope was soon challenged when Angela encountered Dr. Greaves later that same day. She was making notes at the nurse's station when she felt his presence before she saw him. Dr. Greaves approached with a controlled intensity, his gaze fixed and unwavering. She looked up to find his expression as cold as ever, though now there was something darker, a simmering frustration beneath the surface. "Ms. Parker," he said, his tone clipped, a word in private. Angela followed him into a small, empty conference room. As soon as the door shut behind them, Dr. Greaves turned to face her, arms crossed, his posture radiating disapproval. "What exactly did you think you were doing in that meeting with Mr. Edwards?" he began, his voice low but hard-edged. "Do you understand the kind of position you've put this hospital in?" Angela met his gaze evenly, refusing to flinch. "I was asked to attend that meeting, Dr. Greaves," she replied, keeping her tone respectful but firm. "Mr. Edwards chose to speak on my behalf after observing certain issues during his stay." Dr. Greaves scoffed, a sharp sound filled with derision. "Issues? Miss Parker, your presence here is already a delicate matter. You were brought on as a test of St. Mary's commitment to diversity, nothing more. I don't mistake that for an invitation to disrupt the way things are run." The words stung, but Angela steadied herself, reminding herself of her purpose, her integrity. "With all due respect, Dr. Greaves," she said, her voice steady, "I am here to provide the best care possible to every patient, regardless of my background. I have done my job with dedication and professionalism, and that should be enough." Dr. Greaves leaned in, his face inches from hers, his tone icy. "Enough? You think your dedication is what this is about? This is about discipline and respect. I am the senior physician here, and I will not have my authority undermined because some entitled patient feels sorry for you." Angela's hands gripped the edges of her notepad, but she held her composure. She was aware that her words now would either bolster her standing or put her career in jeopardy. "I am fully aware of your position, Dr. Greaves," she replied, her voice unwavering, "and I have never once questioned your authority. But I will not stand silent in the face of treatment that undermines my ability to perform my job or treats me as less than capable." Dr. Greaves' face darkened, his jaw clenched tightly. "Be careful, Miss Parker. Ambition without humility will get you nowhere in this field." A silence fell between them, heavy and tense. Angela's heart pounded, but she did not break eye contact. She could see the disdain in his eyes, the deep-seated resistance to change that he wore like armor. She realized then that his frustration wasn't truly about her presence at St. Mary's. It was about his control over the hospital environment and its people. Finally, Dr. Greaves stepped back, a mocking smile twisting his lips. "You have powerful friends, Miss Parker. But remember that power shifts. You may be riding high now, but I doubt you'll be able to keep up with the standards here much longer." With that, he turned and strode out of the room, leaving Angela alone in the charged silence. She let out a slow breath, feeling the weight of the encounter settle over her. Dr. Greaves' words had been a warning, one rooted in resentment, and she knew she would have to be more vigilant than ever. Later, as she resumed her rounds, Angela replayed the conversation in her mind, the sting of his words mingling with her own sense of resolve. She knew that her path would not be easy. Dr. Greaves was a powerful figure at St. Mary's, and his disapproval would bring more challenges her way. But she reminded herself of why she had chosen this path in the first place: to provide care, to uphold dignity, and to break down barriers, no matter how resistant they were. As she tended to her patients that evening, Angela felt a renewed clarity. She might not have Dr. Greaves' support, but she had her purpose, and she had a strength to withstand whatever came next. Mr. Edwards' support and the subtle shifts she had begun to sense among her colleagues gave her hope that even the most ingrained resistance could be overcome. In the quiet moments of the evening, Angela let herself envision a future at St. Mary's where the walls between people were built of trust and respect, not prejudice. She didn't know how long it would take to reach that place, or if she would even be there to see it, but she knew she would continue pushing forward, one step at a time. For Angela, this was more than a job, it was a mission, one that transcended any single confrontation or person, including Dr. Greaves. And so, with a quiet determination, she braced herself for the road ahead, knowing she would walk it with her head held high. The days following her confrontation with Dr. Greaves brought a wave of tension, but Angela pressed forward, drawing strength from her patience and the purpose that had guided her since she first donned her nursing uniform. Every glance, every whispered comment, every extra difficult assignment seemed designed to test her resolve, but Angela met each one with her quiet resilience. What she didn't know was that Mr. Thomas Edwards, the VIP patient, whose care she had so diligently overseen, was watching closely not just her work, but the culture within St. Mary's Hospital itself. Angela had continued her care for Mr. Edwards with the same professionalism, unaware of the far-reaching influence this man held beyond the walls of his hospital room. He was demanding, yes, but her weeks spent tending to him had revealed a depth to his character, a blend of intelligence, candor, and even a subtle warmth that he revealed only in moments of trust. One day, as Angela entered Mr. Edwards' room to check his vitals and adjust his cast, he greeted her with a knowing smile. "Angela, sit for a moment," he said, his tone less formal than usual. Angela paused, somewhat surprised, but complied, taking the seat beside his bed. "Mr. Edwards, is there something I can assist you with?" she asked, wondering if he needed additional care or had a new request. He regarded her thoughtfully, a pause stretching between them as he seemed to choose his words carefully. "Angela, you've been here how long now?" "Nearly 3 months, sir," she replied, a touch of pride in her voice. She had weathered challenges she wouldn't have believed possible, and each day brought a small but meaningful victory. "And in these 3 months you've been through more than most here," he said, his voice softened by understanding. Angela felt herself tense slightly, unsure of where this was headed. "I want you to know I've seen it. I've seen the way you've been treated, the way Dr. Greaves and others have tested you." Angela was taken aback. She had known Mr. Edwards noticed things, but she hadn't realized just how closely he'd observed her struggles. "Thank you, Mr. Edwards. I try not to let it affect my work," she replied, keeping her voice steady. "That's obvious," he said with a slight smile, nodding approvingly. "But you should know something. This hospital, its board, and much of its funding are under the purview of Healthcare United." Angela's brows knitted in confusion, recognizing the name but not quite understanding the implication. "Healthcare United?" she repeated. "Yes," he confirmed, his tone measured. "I am Thomas Edwards, CEO of Healthcare United. And we're not just any conglomerate, we are one of the primary backers of St. Mary's. I've invested a significant portion of our resources here to make this hospital a place of excellence, not just medically but culturally." A silence settled between them as Angela absorbed his words. She felt a wave of shock wash over her, quickly followed by a deep respect for the man before her. All this time she had thought of him as a challenging, high-profile patient, not as someone with the power to change the very system she worked within. Her pulse quickened at the realization of what this might mean. "Mr. Edwards, I had no idea," she managed, still grappling with this new understanding. He waved a hand, dismissing her shock. "I didn't intend for you to. I wanted to see for myself what the experience is like here for someone in your position. And I must say, what I've witnessed has been eye-opening. Angela, your resilience, your professionalism, you have proven yourself in ways that many here have not." A mix of emotions welled within her: pride, relief, and an unexpected hope. Mr. Edwards' words validated her struggles, and the potential for his influence stirred a sense of possibility she had not dared to entertain. He leaned forward, his gaze intent. "The prejudices, the barriers, this is not what healthcare should be. If my own institution harbors such biases, then I must be the one to initiate change. But I need people like you to help make that change happen." Angela swallowed, feeling the weight of his words. "I'm grateful, Mr. Edwards. I believe in the work we do here, and I want this hospital to be the place of healing it claims to be for everyone." He smiled, a genuine warmth softening his usually stern features. "Good. Then we have work to do. I've already spoken with the board, and I will be making some structural changes here, starting with our leadership. Dr. Greaves' actions will be reviewed, and I will personally ensure that St. Mary's fosters an environment that lives up to the standards we set for patient care. Diversity and inclusion will be more than just a statement on a website." A sense of relief flooded Angela, along with a powerful surge of determination. For so long she had been fighting silently, enduring the unspoken challenges thrown her way. Now, with Mr. Edwards as an ally, her vision of a more inclusive St. Mary's seemed within reach. As she stood to leave, Mr. Edwards offered a final piece of advice, his voice both encouraging and firm. "I never let anyone make you feel less than you are. Angela, you are an asset to this hospital and to healthcare. Hold your head high and continue the work you do. Change isn't easy, but it starts with people like you." Angela met his gaze, a steady resolve in her own. "Thank you, Mr. Edwards. I won't forget this." Leaving his room, Angela walked down the familiar corridors of St. Mary's with a new sense of purpose. The future still held challenges, but for the first time she felt she was not alone in facing them. With Mr. Edwards' support, she could see a path forward, one where she and others like her could finally find their rightful place within these walls. The following morning, word spread quickly through the corridors of St. Mary's General Hospital that a meeting had been called for all senior staff and department heads. The air buzzed with speculation. Such meetings were rare, and the urgency was palpable. Angela could feel the ripples of tension as she made her way to her assigned rounds, hearing snippets of hushed conversations and catching fleeting glances from colleagues who couldn't seem to hide their curiosity. In his room, Mr. Edwards sat with a calm composure that belied the significance of what he was about to do. His gaze was sharp, a man with a mission who had seen enough. The revelation of his true position as CEO of Healthcare United had not only unsettled the staff but also cast his presence at St. Mary's in a new, powerful light. Now, with a steely resolve, he was ready to confront the systemic issues he had witnessed firsthand. In the large conference room where the meeting was held, Dr. Greaves and other department heads assembled, murmurs of curiosity and concern swirling around them. Dr. Greaves himself looked uneasy, his usually confident posture somewhat tense, as he glanced at the clock, waiting for the meeting to begin. The tension thickened when Mr. Edwards entered, his presence commanding the room into immediate silence. "Thank you all for gathering on such short notice," he began, his voice calm but authoritative. "As some of you may have realized, my time here as a patient has been informative. I came to St. Mary's expecting to see a hospital of excellence, a place where patients receive not only the best care but also the dignity and respect they deserve. But I'm afraid what I've witnessed here tells a different story." A murmur rippled through the room. The senior staff exchanged wary glances, unsure of where Mr. Edwards was leading. Dr. Greaves shifted uncomfortably in his seat, a subtle frown creasing his brow. "I have witnessed behaviors and attitudes that have no place in modern healthcare," Mr. Edwards continued, his gaze piercing. "Biases, microaggressions, outright discrimination, all of which impact not only the staff but ultimately the care of our patients. It is unacceptable, and I will not stand by and allow this to persist in an institution that Healthcare United supports." The room fell into a stunned silence, the weight of his words settling over them like a dense fog. Dr. Greaves cleared his throat, struggling to maintain his composure. Mr. Edwards, while we respect your observations, St. Mary's has always upheld the highest standards. We have policies in place to address these matters. Policies on paper mean nothing if they are not reflected in practice, Dr. Greaves, Mr. Edwards interjected, his tone sharp. I have personally witnessed the treatment of one of your most dedicated nurses, Ms. Parker, who has endured behaviors that should never be tolerated in a place that claims to serve all people equally. Angela, who had been standing outside the room, could feel her heart pounding as she listened. She hadn't known Mr. Edwards would be so direct, that he would name her specifically in his statements. A mix of pride and vulnerability washed over her. Finally, someone was standing up for her, validating her experiences. Dr. Greaves, visibly taken aback, attempted to regain control. Mr. Edwards, we are of course deeply sorry if Ms. Parker has faced any discomfort, but as you know, healthcare is a demanding field. High standards must be met, and sometimes, newer staff struggle to adapt. Ms. Parker has met every standard I would expect and beyond, Mr. Edwards replied, his tone unwavering. What she has struggled with are the barriers put in place by those who cannot see beyond their own biases. And that is what we will address today. Mr. Edwards continued, outlining a clear plan to enforce meaningful changes at St. Mary's. He announced the formation of a diversity and inclusion committee that would oversee all reports of discrimination, bias, and unfair treatment within the hospital. This committee would be empowered to investigate complaints with full authority, ensuring accountability at every level. And to emphasize the gravity of his commitment, Mr. Edwards named Angela as his recommendation for the committee's inaugural chair. Angela felt a swell of emotion as his words reached her. It was both an honor and a responsibility, and she knew it would not come without challenges. Still, the support of someone like Mr. Edwards was a powerful testament to the impact her work had made, and she could sense a shift in the atmosphere around her. As Mr. Edwards spoke, the room shifted from shock to contemplation. Some nodded, seeing the need for change, while others remained stiff, clearly uncomfortable with the sudden spotlight on their practices. Dr. Greaves was silent, his jaw set tightly as he listened. For the first time, Angela saw him as someone grappling with the possibility that his unchecked authority might no longer be absolute. This is not a punishment, Mr. Edwards said, addressing the room with a firmness that softened slightly with understanding. It's an opportunity, a chance for St. Mary's to become a true model of excellence, not just in the quality of care, but in the culture we create for both our patients and our staff. This hospital has a reputation to uphold, and I am determined to ensure that reputation reflects integrity, respect, and inclusivity. The meeting ended with a sense of finality that left many in the room reflective, some even visibly relieved. For the first time in years, there was an acknowledgement that things needed to change, and that this change would be backed by the highest levels of leadership. Angela returned to her rounds feeling the weight of her new role and the responsibility it carried. She knew that the road ahead would be fraught with challenges and resistance. But with Mr. Edwards' support and the newfound resolve of some of her colleagues, she felt more hopeful than ever. There was now a path forward, a chance to build a St. Mary's where no one would have to endure what she had, where people could come to work with pride and dignity. As she walked down the familiar halls, Angela could feel a renewed energy in the air. She was no longer alone in her fight. Together, they would build a future worth working for, a place of healing, respect, and equality for all who walked through its doors. Angela's new role as the chair of the Diversity and Inclusion Committee came with both pride and an undeniable weight. The announcement sent ripples through St. Mary's, and while some welcomed the change, others eyed her with skepticism or thinly veiled resentment. For Angela, this was not just a title, it was a call to transform the very culture of the hospital. The committee met for the first time in a small conference room, Angela seated at the head of the table. Around her sat staff members from various departments, nurses, doctors, administrative personnel representing the diversity St. Mary's hoped to foster. She felt a pulse of anticipation as she looked at each face, sensing that some were as nervous as she was, while others harbored doubts. Yet, amidst the uncertainty, Angela saw a glimmer of hope. She began the meeting with a calm but determined voice, welcoming each member and acknowledging the journey ahead. We're here to make St. Mary's a place where everyone can work and heal without fear of prejudice or exclusion, she said, her eyes meeting each person's in turn. This committee isn't just about policies, it's about fostering a culture of respect, empathy, and understanding. It won't be easy, but I believe we have the strength and commitment to make it happen. Her words set the tone, and as the discussion unfolded, Angela listened carefully to each perspective. Some voiced concerns over ingrained attitudes that would be difficult to change. Others spoke of past incidents that had gone unaddressed, leaving wounds still fresh. It was an emotionally charged meeting, yet Angela guided it with grace, steering the conversation toward solutions, policies, and initiatives that could bring about lasting change. By the end of the meeting, Angela had laid the groundwork for an action plan that included staff training, safe channels for reporting grievances, and regular workshops on empathy and communication. She had also emphasized the importance of accountability, a commitment that would ensure each report was handled with the seriousness it deserved. The meeting adjourned with a collective sense of purpose, a shared commitment to building a better St. Mary's. Leaving the conference room, Angela felt both invigorated and apprehensive. She knew the road ahead would be steep, filled with moments of resistance and doubt, but this was what she had dreamed of, an opportunity to make real, lasting changes. Her thoughts wandered to Mr. Edwards, whose quiet but powerful support had opened the doors for her to take on this role. She resolved to honor his trust and the trust of every staff member who had shared their stories in that meeting. The following days were a whirlwind of activity. Angela held one-on-one meetings with staff members who wanted to share their experiences privately, listening with compassion as they recounted the challenges they had faced. She could see the toll that years of subtle, and sometimes overt, discrimination had taken on many of them. Each story added to her understanding of what needed to change, each conversation strengthening her resolve to make St. Mary's a sanctuary for both patients and staff. Of course, not everyone was supportive. Dr. Greaves, in particular, remained a powerful and vocal critic. He avoided Angela when possible, but when they did cross paths, his comments were often laced with veiled hostility. "I hope you realize that this committee of yours is just a passing trend," he remarked one afternoon, his tone filled with a condescension that Angela knew was intended to undermine her confidence. Angela met his gaze steadily. "With respect, Dr. Greaves, the commitment to diversity and inclusion isn't a trend. It's a necessity, and it's here to stay." Her voice was calm, but her words carried the quiet determination that had become her hallmark. Dr. Greaves gave a tight smile, clearly displeased, and walked away. Angela knew that he would continue to resist her efforts, but she also knew that his influence was waning. The hospital board had placed their trust in her, and Mr. Edwards' backing had ensured that her role would not be easily dismissed. As the days turned into weeks, small but noticeable changes began to take shape at St. Mary's. Staff members who had previously kept their heads down started to speak up in meetings, sharing ideas and insights without fear of judgment. A sense of camaraderie blossomed among those who supported Angela's vision, creating pockets of solidarity that slowly expanded throughout the hospital. Nurses and doctors from diverse backgrounds felt more empowered, their voices no longer silenced or disregarded. Angela initiated workshops that quickly became popular, even among those who had initially been skeptical. Through discussions and exercises, staff members began to confront their biases, learn about different perspectives, and understand how their actions impacted those around them. The sessions were often intense, filled with moments of discomfort as people faced the realities of their own behaviors and assumptions. But Angela's compassionate guidance helped foster an environment of growth and reflection. One evening, as Angela walked through the halls, she felt the atmosphere had shifted in subtle ways. A nurse she hadn't spoken to before smiled warmly at her, and a doctor gave her a respectful nod as they passed. Small gestures, but ones that signaled a newfound sense of respect and camaraderie. She felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that each day brought St. Mary's closer to the inclusive and welcoming environment she envisioned. Reflecting on her journey, Angela felt an immense gratitude not only for Mr. Edwards' intervention, but also for every individual who had shared in her vision and worked alongside her. The challenges were far from over, and she knew that there would be days of resistance, moments where her resolve would be tested. But for the first time, Angela felt that St. Mary's was becoming the hospital it claimed to be, a place where everyone, staff and patients alike, could find healing, dignity, and respect. In her heart, Angela knew she was no longer just a nurse at St. Mary's. She had become a catalyst, a bridge toward a future that was finally within reach. With each step she took, she carried the weight of that responsibility with pride, knowing that this role was not just her duty but her legacy. The changes at St. Mary's General Hospital began subtly, a gentle ripple that slowly grew into a powerful wave. Under Angela's leadership on the Diversity and Inclusion Committee, St. Mary's started to shed its old skin of bias and exclusivity, transforming into a more welcoming and supportive environment for all who worked and received care there. It was not a transformation without resistance, but Angela's unwavering dedication inspired a shift in both the staff's behavior and the hospital's atmosphere. In meetings, Angela encouraged open dialogue, creating spaces where everyone felt safe to speak their truth. She began implementing new policies that prioritized inclusivity, from updated hiring practices that focused on diversity to trainings that addressed unconscious bias. At first, these changes were met with skepticism, but slowly the workshops and discussions began to foster a deeper understanding among staff. The staff learned to see their colleagues as individuals, not just co-workers, with unique experiences and challenges shaped by race, gender, and background. These transformations became evident in the way people interacted. Doctors who had once treated minority nurses with a dismissive air now addressed them by name, acknowledging their skills and contributions. Angela noticed fewer hushed whispers, fewer lingering glances filled with judgment. Her colleagues, once hesitant or even fearful of speaking up, now voiced their concerns openly, confident that their words would be met with respect and consideration. It was a slow process, with setbacks and days when it felt as though little had changed, but Angela remained steadfast, knowing that real, meaningful progress would not happen overnight. One afternoon, Angela found herself in a particularly poignant moment that epitomized the shift at St. Mary's. She was conducting a training session on empathy and communication, her favorite of the sessions she led. The workshop encouraged staff to reflect on their own biases and consider how those biases might impact their patient care and interactions with colleagues. A doctor who had been particularly resistant, a young surgeon named Dr. Evans, was among the attendees. Angela remembered the skepticism in his voice during their first meeting, his dismissive comments about yet another workshop, as he'd put it. During the session, Angela asked participants to share an experience where they had felt judged or misunderstood. Dr. Evans sat quietly, his gaze averted, until finally he cleared his throat and spoke. I never thought much about this sort of thing before," he admitted, his voice low. "But my younger sister faced similar challenges at her workplace, and I was always quick to dismiss her complaints. I realize now that I didn't understand what she was going through, and I might have been doing the same thing here." His face flushed slightly, as if he was processing this realization in real time. Angela smiled warmly, feeling a swell of pride and respect for Dr. Evans' honesty. "Thank you, Dr. Evans, for sharing that," she said. "It takes courage to acknowledge our biases. Recognizing them is the first step toward change, and it's never too late to start." That moment marked a turning point. From then on, Dr. Evans became an active supporter of the committee's efforts, even volunteering to lead sessions on teamwork and respectful communication. His transformation reflected the cultural shift taking root at St. Mary's, and Angela couldn't help but feel a deep satisfaction at seeing her colleagues embrace the changes. Beyond the internal culture, the patients, too, began to notice the shift. The environment at St. Mary's felt warmer, less tense, and more inviting. Patients, who could often sense the invisible divides between staff, noticed the newfound camaraderie among their caregivers. Angela observed patients' increased comfort, their willingness to trust their care teams, and the smiles that blossomed more frequently as staff and patients alike felt the effects of the hospital's evolving spirit. Perhaps the most significant change came when the hospital administration, led by Mr. Edwards, instituted a system of accountability, ensuring that any complaints of discrimination or bias would be thoroughly investigated. No longer would incidents be swept under the rug or ignored. This newfound transparency empowered the staff, reminding them that their voices mattered and that their experiences were valid. Angela received messages of gratitude from staff members across departments, each story reinforcing the importance of her role and the impact of their collective efforts. Of course, resistance did not disappear entirely. Dr. Greaves remained an ongoing reminder of the hospital's past attitudes. Though his influence had waned, he continued to resist Angela's changes, clinging to an outdated hierarchy that placed his authority above all else. Angela and Dr. Greaves occasionally clashed in meetings, their interactions simmering with unspoken tension. But each time, Angela responded with professionalism, maintaining her commitment to progress and letting her actions speak louder than words. Angela's persistence eventually earned her a reputation as both a compassionate leader and a formidable advocate for change. Her colleagues began to look to her not just as a nurse but as a source of guidance and integrity. In small ways, she noticed that people sought her advice, valuing her insight on matters of patient care and workplace ethics. Her leadership extended beyond the confines of the Diversity and Inclusion Committee, shaping St. Mary's in ways she had only dreamed of when she first walked through its doors. The journey was far from over, and Angela knew that maintaining this new culture would require constant work, vigilance, and compassion. But she no longer bore the weight of this mission alone. The staff at St. Mary's had become allies. committed to the same vision of an inclusive, respectful workplace. Together, they had built a foundation that would support generations of caregivers and patients to come. Walking the familiar halls one evening, Angela paused, watching as a group of nurses from different backgrounds laughed together, sharing stories after a long shift. The sight filled her with a profound sense of peace. St. Mary's was no longer just a hospital, it was becoming a community. A place where people could be both skilled professionals and their authentic selves. A place where healing happened on every level. Angela knew there would still be challenges, but now, for the first time, she could look toward the future with hope. The cultural shift at St. Mary's was not just a change in policies or procedures. It was a transformation of the heart, a new beginning where empathy, respect, and unity formed the core of what it meant to be a part of St. Mary's General Hospital. Thank you very much for listening to my story. Your concern and sharing are precious. Wish you always have good luck and happiness in life.